For a long time I wanted to carpet my 300 litre aquarium. It's a big tank. It has a lot of plants in the background and midsection, but the foreground is completely empty. And for this tank I bought 50 dwarf Sagittaria, I think it's called. But before I plant these plants I had to increase the depth of the substrate in the foreground, which is what I'm doing here, because the plants obviously need a bit of depth for them to root, and because I previously didn't have any plants at the front, the substrate was very low, which is what you want to do really to get that nice look. You want it low at the front and deep at the back. So these are the dwarf sag, which are quite long. I didn't expect them to be this long, but the idea was to plant them, and then once they get going, once they settle in, I was just going to trim the lot right down. So at the beginning you might think it doesn't look that good, having all these at the front. It's a bit out of place, and I agree, doesn't look the best, but once I trimmed them all down I was hoping that they grow back shorter, because I've seen these plants on the internet, on Google and everything, and they're not quite this tall. So I was just thinking maybe it's the way they were grown from the supplier, but I carried on, thought I'd give it a go, see what happens. But it didn't work out that well. They kind of all died within a couple of days. A lot of them melted and just floated to the top. And started floating around, and I think some of the fish might have ate them, I'm not sure, but they looked towards the end, like a couple of days, so about a week after, all you could see was just the tops just peering out of the substrate. So I think the fish might have nibbled them down. Whether they did that once they were dying or what, I'm not sure, but they just didn't last long at all, which was a shame really, because I thought once these settle in well and they spread out, it could look quite nice in the end, but they just they just wouldn't stay. And I don't know why really, because I've had these plants before and they've always worked really well. But I guess it depends what what the tank is, what the setup is, what type of fish you have. Sometimes the plants will work really well, sometimes they won't. But in this case they just didn't. It might be because of the tank, because it's 2 foot deep. Maybe the plants aren't getting enough light at the bottom, but it does look well lit up at the bottom of the tank, as you can see, so I'm not sure. But yeah, in the previous tanks where this plant worked really well, they weren't quite as tall, so maybe that's the issue, I'm not sure. I haven't seen the rainbow fish eat plants before, so I'm not really sure it was them, to be honest. I think the plants just died on their own, you know what I mean. Now, upon failing carpeting that tank, I've bought some dwarf chainswords. Pretty similar plant, meant to be an easy, low-tech carpeting plant, like the dwarf sag. This is, but yeah, dwarf chainswords. 30 of them here. They look really nice. I'm going to be planting them in the 60 litre tank. You know, my other tank that I keep switching around. Really healthy plants, really nice. And again, I had to add a lot more substrate to this tank to accommodate having the plants. So hopefully this tank goes well. I just wanted to plant them all around the centre really, not too close to the left because of the roots on the pothos plant, and not too close to the right because the hang on back filter, that's where the hang on back filter is. It has a bit of a current, so I didn't want them to be directly below the current. The plants in the middle of the tank that were already there coming out of the water, that's Echinodorus Argentine, I think that's the one. Yeah, pothos on the left, and water sprite floating on the left as well. So it doesn't look like many plants, but there are 30, give or take, just planted sporadically in the middle, spacing them out a little bit, because these plants will send out runners underneath the substrate, and I'll get new plants from that. So if you start off with 30 like this, then the goal is in a couple months time, there'll be twice as many of these plants, filling in the gaps themselves with those runners. So it's a good start to a carpeted tank, and I'm hoping they take well. I think the neon tetras will like them. They'll be able to swim in between and have a little bit more cover. I don't think I'll be adding much more plants to this. I think I'm just going to leave the carpet and have the Echinodorus coming out the top. They're basically a type of sword plant. That's if the carpet works as well. If they all die, then I'll have to think of a different plant to put in here and fill out the tank with. But I've had this plant a few times in a few different tanks. It's always worked out pretty well. One thing to note that when putting a lot of plants in a tank like this, especially when it just has just standard substrate, because I don't use substrate that's meant for planting. It's just very basic black sand substrate. There's no nutrients in it at all, and obviously these plants, to get them to carpet how I want them to carpet, they're going to need a lot of nutrients. So what I did was I bought about 50 root tabs. They're very cheap to buy, and they're little tablets that contain fertilizer, and I'll just push them under the substrate, all along, all in between, because a plant like the Echinodorus that's coming out at the top of the water, you can imagine the roots on that plant, because it's such a big plant, and without any nutrients in the substrate, the plants just won't grow that well. So I'll just get loads of root tabs, and I just put them all under the substrate. I think they last around 3 months, so every 3 months or so I'll just add new ones, because like I said, they're quite cheap. And I don't know, I just don't use planted substrate, I just use the basic sand. I like it, I think it looks nice. So I hope you enjoyed the video, and let me know if any of you have these plants in your aquarium. Let me know how they're going and if you succeed. This tank's quite shallow. It's quite a shallow tank compared to the 2-foot tank that I have. This tank's very shallow, and it gets loads of light, especially from the window behind. So I think these plants will do really well. I'm hoping they'll do really well, but the ones in the 300 litre, they just didn't do well at all. So I reckon we'll get some good results from this. So yeah, thanks for watching, and any thoughts or questions, let me know in the comments.